I now give the floor to His Excellency Mohamed Ali Nafti, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Migration and Tunisians Abroad of Tunisia.
In the name of God, the Merciful, the Compassionate, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, it is my pleasure to extend our warmest congratulations to His Excellency, Mr. Philemon Yang, and the Republic of Cameroon on presiding over the 79th session of the General Assembly. We wish him success in conducting its work and stress Tunisia's support to his vision, namely unity and diversity for the advancement of peace, sustainable development, and human dignity for everyone, everywhere. I would also like to express our heartfelt thanks and appreciation to His Excellency Mr. Denis Francis for a successful presidency. We renew our appreciation to the continuous efforts of the Secretary-General, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, to restore trust in multilateralism. Mr. President, as hopeful as we are to achieve the necessary change and reforms and pave the way towards a safer, more peaceful, equitable, and sustainable world through the initiatives and tracks proposed in the Secretary-General's framework, our common agenda, and through the outcomes of the Summit of the Future, we express deep concern and disappointment and denounce the current situation in the Middle East. The horrendous humanitarian suffering of the Palestinian people continues on their territory. For almost a year now, they have been subjected to the most despicable war crimes, a genocide, and all forms of violations of human rights and the purposes and principles for which the United Nations was established. Such violations are perpetrated by the occupying forces without any sense of accountability. Meanwhile, the international community remains unjustifiably and immorally silent. The failure of the international community to ensure the respect of the international humanitarian law, despite the measures imposed by the ICJ to protect civilians in Gaza from the risk of a genocide, puts the life of Palestinians at stake. Suddenly, the slogan repeated from different rostrums calling for human rights and humanitarian issues to take precedence disappears when it comes to the Palestinian people. The only way towards a safe future for all peoples starts with a belief that all human beings are equal without any discrimination or selectivity, and away from double standards. We cannot start a new phase of multilateralism, international relations, and sustainable development based on the principle of leaving no one behind if we continue to ignore the tragedy of the Palestinian people. In this vein, we call upon the international community to take immediate, effective, and responsible steps to save what can still be saved, stop the bloodshed, and end the genocide and starvation of Gaza. This war has targeted schools, hospitals, and civilian infrastructure and facilities, killing more than 40,000 people. We also call upon the Security Council to break its stalemate and play its natural role, namely the maintenance of international peace and security, by holding the occupation authorities accountable for the humanitarian tragedy in Gaza imposing an immediate ceasefire, stopping the blatant and abhorrent attacks on innocent Palestinians, and preventing forced displacement, settlements, and the violation of sacred places. The war on Gaza caused a deep rift in humanity and jeopardized people's trust in the UN system and main organs to implement their resolutions. We recall the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion adopted on July 19, 2024 at the request of the General Assembly on the legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of the Zionist occupation in the occupied Palestinian territory. It found that the continued presence of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory is illegal and that the State of Israel is under an obligation to cease immediately all new settlement activities and to evacuate all settlers from the occupied Palestinian territory. This opinion puts the international community to the test to prove its commitment to the supremacy of international law and its applicability to everyone without any exception, selectivity, or double standards. Our country continues to firmly and unconditionally support the right of the Palestinian people to restore their imprescriptible, legitimate, and inalienable rights, mainly their right to self-determination and establishment of an independent, sovereign state on all the Palestinian territory with Al-Quds al-Sharif as a capital. Tunisia stresses its support to the Palestinian request for full membership at the United Nations. We appreciate international recognition of Palestine and hope that it would lead to Palestine becoming a full member at the United Nations without further delay. Once again, we strongly condemn the attacks on brotherly Lebanon, targeting its people and threatening its stability and security at a time when our countries are meeting at the United Nations. We call upon the Security Council to take a firm stance to stop these crimes against humanity without delay. Mr. President, the principle of leaving no one behind cannot be achieved with slogans. We cannot achieve the desired goals and overcome the failures of the past and the present unless we all have a genuine will to change and reform. For this reason, we need a unified and responsible diagnosis of the root causes for the failure by the current international community to address the growing conflicts and wars, the increase in extremism, terrorism, and organized crime, the deterioration of crises and climate disasters which threaten the survival of millions of people. In addition, the levels of poverty, hunger, and inequality are unprecedented. There is a big increase in the number of refugees and displaced. The development and digital gap between the North and the South is widening, and the international financial system is unable to respond to the development needs of the majority of states. All these challenges represent dangerous indicators that the current international system is no longer on track, hence requiring us all to carry out the necessary reviews and reforms to address all the chaos, inequality, and turmoil. Those challenges also require states, peoples, and institutions to make joint efforts, share responsibility, and respect international law, the UN Charter, and human rights on an equal footing without any discrimination or politicization. The past 8 decades have proven the urgent need for reforming international relations and reviewing the basics and working methods of multilateralism to address the needs of people and end every disorder which caused tragedy and suffering for millions and led to undeniable existential threats. Such threats cannot be addressed using the same tools and methods that only take into account the interests of a minority of states at the expense of others. In this regard, we stress the urgent need for developed countries to respect their commitment to financing development, supporting climate efforts, and effectively contributing to the eradication of poverty while supporting growth and building the resilience and sustainability of developing countries. We also stress the need for ending all forms of trusteeship, the imposition of policies and instructions, and interference in states' internal affairs to ensure their national sovereignty, independence, choices, and cultural specificities are respected, because this diversity is a source of wealth. The challenges ahead can only be faced by rebuilding international relations based on solidarity, fair and constructive cooperation, mutual respect, and equality. We also call for promoting the role of the United Nations and introducing the necessary reforms to its institutions and organs to improve their performance and promote their credibility, mainly the Security Council, which is now paralyzed by growing geostrategic conflicts. Mr. President, based on its genuine belief in multilateralism and its respect to the purposes of the UN Charter, Tunisia took part in all tracks and initiatives proposed by the Secretary General's plan, Our Common Agenda, as well as the SDG Summit and the Summit of the Future, which was recently held here at the UN. If the necessary follow-up and implementation mechanisms are adopted, their outcomes represent a historic opportunity and an essential tool to overcome challenges, mitigate risks, and establish a safer, more peaceful, and sustainable world. At the same time, we reaffirm the urgent need to introduce structural reforms to the global financial system and review the role of credit rating agencies to alleviate the debt servicing burden on developing states and facilitate their access to development financing. This will allow them to recover from the repercussions of successive global crises for which they have paid a high price, even though they did not have a role in causing most of them. It will also allow them to focus their efforts on meeting the human development needs of their people. We also call for developing tools for bilateral and multilateral international cooperation to ensure the recovery of stolen assets moved abroad. This will accelerate economic recovery and promote development, given that it is the inherent right of people affected. Such violations should be prevented in the future because they deplete states' resources and represent the biggest form of corruption. Mr. President, irregular migration is growing in a number of regions, especially in the Mediterranean, our region. It is one of the main indicators of the weak global governance and the lack of political will to address the consequences of development crises, climate change, and conflicts. As we have stressed time and again, this multidimensional issue requires a collective responsibility-sharing approach among countries of origin transit, and destination, as well as regional and international organizations to address the root causes of this phenomenon and not just its consequences. We also called for comprehensive solutions that address vulnerabilities, the decline in literacy rates, and weak development programs to usher in a new reality in countries of origin, especially in Africa, and provide their people with a dignified life and decent work opportunities to preserve their right to life and development and protect them from the perils of a journey they take in the Mediterranean seeking a better life, and to shield them against the exploitation of criminal, smuggling, and human trafficking networks. Our approach to dealing with irregular migration is clear. It is based on the respect of human rights and the rejection of all forms of racial discrimination and hate speech, while respecting our international commitments and national legislations. We continue to make every effort possible to save lives and provide the necessary care to those in need while preserving their dignity. However, we reject any implicit settlement project for irregular migrants. We also reject any attempt by politicians and the media to exploit the situation of migrants and their suffering to make political gains and achieve their suspicious agendas. Mr. President, in Tunisia, we are aware of the challenges in the phase ahead and are firmly attached to reform and the promotion of democracy, the rule of law, and good governance. These are based on fighting and preventing corruption and achieving our people's aspirations to more well-being, prosperity, and sustainable development. We are attached to the pillars of our foreign policy and international commitments, and rely on our human capacities and our constructive cooperation and partnerships with our friends and partners based on mutual benefit. Our youth are a source of inspiration and the face of the future. So we ensure they play a leading role in transformative solutions and decision-making. We continue to promote our legal frameworks and strategic plans to ensure the inclusion and economic empowerment of women and promote their participation in public life at all levels, including peacekeeping in the world. With the same commitment and will, Tunisia continues to play an active role in international and UN efforts to promote regional and international peace and security, ensure the respect of international law and international humanitarian law, and all forms of injustice, occupation, and human rights violations, and achieve development for all. We stress our firm position in support of the efforts of our Libyan brothers and sisters to overcome their differences and reach a political settlement through constructive dialogue with the help of the United Nations to maintain Libya's security and stability and strengthen its unity. Once again, we reject all forms of foreign intervention in Libya's internal affairs. We also call for uniting UN and international efforts to find a political solution for the situation in Syria and Yemen that ends the suffering of these two brethren people and restores peace and security while preserving their sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. Tunisia calls upon Sudanese parties to stop the fighting and opt for dialogue and peaceful settlements to overcome the current crisis and restore security and stability to the Sudan in order to end the scourge of war and displacement causing suffering to its people. With regards to the African continent, which is the most affected by climate change, global crises, terrorism, and instability, We call for more UN and international efforts to help the continent in overcoming its different challenges and crises and move forward towards stability, peace, security, and sustainable development. African solutions for African problems should be the approach for achieving the goal of silencing the guns by 2030. We once again call upon the United Nations to provide financial and logistical support to African-led peace operations. It is important that cooperation and coordination continue among UN and regional organs to achieve the Africa we want. Mr. President, the world has just entered a new phase of digital change, and the use of modern technologies is on the rise in all fields. As we stress the importance of the Global Digital Compact, we call for strengthening cooperation in technology transfer to bridge the digital gap between the South and the North so that no one is left behind. In the same vein, we call for fighting digital chaos and misinformation, as well as the criminal and illegal use of digital technologies to sow the seeds of chaos and destabilize communities. Mr. President, the next phase is very complicated because of the challenges facing the security and well-being of the present and future generations and the future of our planet. We can no longer address the situation with the same tools and methods. We cannot repeat the mistakes of the past. The only way forward is based on solidarity, cooperation, and our shared destiny. Tunisia's foreign policy and diplomacy has always been based on optimism and pragmatism. Despite all the shocks and challenges facing our world, we believe that the UN remains our only hope, since it represents international legitimacy and since it carries the hopes and dreams of the people as we prepare to celebrate its 80th anniversary next year. God willing. Thank you.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Migration and Tunisians abroad of Tunisia.